A new year, huh? Well, a good time as any to update some things.
So, 2016. While the last year was pretty rough on me personally, it wasn't without its great moments. And because the title is the all-knowing deity we should all treat with respect, you can probably guess that this year was pretty great for me in terms of games at the very least. Heck, it was pretty great for gaming in general aside from a few blemishes. You've probably seen at least one of these kinds of lists before. The game qualifies as long as I first played it in 2016. And that's pretty much all you need to know, so roll the transition. I'd say the FPS genre is still fairly unknown to me. I've definitely gotten more into the genre in recent years, but there were still FPSs that I thought I would never play. One of them was Borderlands. At the time of writing this, I've only scratched the surface of the first Borderlands, but I've enjoyed myself thoroughly during the few hours I've put into it. So the premise of Borderlands is that you're this mercenary person who's trying to make his, or her, way into this mystical place known as the Vault. And that's all I can really tell you about the story, because the real meat of the game is in the gameplay. You can choose between 4 different classes, all of which have their own strengths and weaknesses as well as their own preferred weapon types. You proceed in the game by doing different missions for the NPCs in Firestone, mostly by blasting some bandits' heads off or raiding through monster nests. One quality of Borderlands which really stuck out to me was its unrealism. I mean, you have monsters with the weirdest designs, weapons that shoot fire and lightning, as well as a beautiful cel-shaded art style that really helps to give the game its own identity. Add in an atmospheric soundtrack and you have a full package of some FPS goodness. Also, be prepared to meet some crazy people. Lots of crazy people. So you know how Shovel Knight was the indie sensation of 2014 and I only got to play it the following year? Well, oopsie daisy! It happened again. So you guys remember Undertale? Yeah, you can probably see where this is going. And if you have a problem with the game being this low on the list, well, you're just going to have a bad time, I guess. I think there's not a lot I can say about Undertale considering everything, but I'll elaborate anyways. This game is an RPG where your player character is trapped in the underground, which is a place ruled by monsters, and as such, the monsters you face are the inhabitants of this world. And because of this, you have the option of either sparing every monster you come across, or kill every one of them. These actions will also decide whether you're heading down the pacifist, genocide, or the neutral route. However, what really makes this game stand out, aside from the monster sparing system, is its colorful cast of characters. Undertale is filled to the brim with personality, and the characters are a big part of this, ranging from funny and punny skeleton brothers to an edgy fish lady with spears and goat parents. These characters really help bring the game a ton of color and entertainment. I do have some criticisms towards the game, like the bullet hell battle system, which is kinda in my opinion, and some parts of the presentation, but overall Undertale is a pretty solid package. It's not my favorite indie game, but I can definitely see why so many people loved it. I mean, it has a pretty kick-ass soundtrack too. And Timmy's. Can't forget about the Timmy's. So when I made a list like this last year, I talked about the first Hyperdimension Neptunia game and how it impressed me after only a few hours into the game. Well, I played even less of the second game and I can already say it's better than the first one. The gameplay aspects of Rebirth 2 are almost exactly the same as in the first game. You can still attack enemies with 3 different kinds of combos, roam around the dungeons looking for items and materials, and destroy everyone with the EXE drives. But it's the added little things that make this game for me, like the adorable mini dungeon where you can find all sorts of different items, and 4 party members! However, what really makes this game the superior one for me is more its improvements in the story and characters rather than the gameplay. Remember when I said that the writing in the first game was one of my favorite things about it? Well, the second game also delivers on this, and then some. While it's no longer making fun of the console wars, at least not as much as in the first game, the writing focused on making the new characters more relatable, which I think it succeeds at. I also thought the second game had a more interesting narrative. Granted, it's still a pretty cliched save the world plot, but because one of the main goals includes saving the main characters of the first game, who also happen to be the big sisters of this game's main characters, it feels a lot more personal. Like I said, I haven't put that many hours into the game, hell, I probably haven't even scratched the surface, but I think there's a new favorite in the making with this one. Also, the CPU candidates are all fucking adorable. Just felt I needed to point that out. So, I'm a pretty big fan of Naughty Dog. Put that together how I gushed about Uncharted 2 last year and you can probably see where this is going. And no, it's not Uncharted 4 because I'm still a poor little shit without a PS4, so the game that appears on this list is Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception. While I'll fully admit that the third game isn't quite as good as the second, Drake's Deception was still a pretty good time all around. The main gameplay mechanics from Uncharted 1 and 2 are still pretty much the same. You climb over cliffs and buildings, shoot down all the baddies who want you dead. It's great stuff. Everything that the third game does is pretty much just doing a little polishing, but nothing that absolutely changes the formula. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. However, what really got me about this game was its story. While the 2 first games are more about treasure hunting and then finding out that that treasure was actually a no-no, and there's that in this game as well, this game focuses more on the relationship between the main character Nate and his mentor Sully, such as how they first met and how they first decided to embark on this adventure. And as a bonus, we now have a villain with an actual personal connection to the main characters,
further solidifying that this guy belongs in the trash.
So overall, Uncharted 3 was pretty great. Like I said, it wasn't as good as 2, and this game did have some pretty aggravating moments from time to time, but the clever puzzles, action-packed gameplay, engaging story, and Nathan Drake kept me entertained all the way from the beginning to the end. Now about that PS4.
You know, I actually never thought of what a Kirby/Gurren Lagann crossover would look like.
So after falling in love with Kirby's Return to Dreamland, there was no way I wasn't going to play this game. Admittedly, Planet Robobot's core gameplay mechanics are pretty much the same as its predecessor Triple Deluxe, but in my opinion, this game manages to be even more fun than Triple Deluxe ever was. The main change in gameplay comes from the mech suit, or the Robobot armor. And surprisingly, it's not as game-breaking as the Black Hole of Doom, Hypernova from the last game. Heck, the mech suit actually hinders your movement. But as a trade-off, you're not only a lot stronger and can break certain obstacles pretty easily, but you can also copy abilities just like normally and experiment with old abilities as they were completely new ones. Add in some great new copy abilities like Poison and Doctor, some creative and fun levels, a semi-interesting story if you take the time to read the dialogue, and 2D shooter segments that are actually kind of fun, and you get one of the finest 2D platformers on the 3DS. It gets a full FinnishDuck seal of approval. And did I really just say that? I ruined everything. Where's the fucking bleach? For the past few years, I've really branched out in RPGs. I've gotten particularly more into strategy RPGs, which wouldn't have sounded all that interesting to me a few years ago. And the series I have to thank for this newfound interest is Fire Emblem. I played both Fire Emblem Awakening and Blazing Sword quite recently and loved them both. And in 2016 I played 2 more Fire Emblem games that I enjoyed, Sacred Stones and Fire Emblem Fates. Now, at the time of writing this, the only game from the Fates Trinity I've played is Birthright, but since I've really enjoyed myself from what I've played so far, I can't not put this game on the list. The thing I love most about Fates is the fact that it pretty much takes all the things that made Awakening so good and expands upon them. The combat is satisfying, pair-up is no longer broken as hell, and the new class added to the game and the changes made to the weapon triangle really spice up the strategy in battles. I can't really say much about the story as a whole since again, not played all the games, but what I can say is that the cast of this game is mostly pretty damn likable, just like Awakening and Blazing Sword. And the presentation is great too. The OST includes tons of both catchy and grand tunes that are a joy to listen to, and the game is definitely one of the best looking games on the 3DS. I know a lot of people are quite split in the middle about this game, and trust me, it's not like I think this game is perfect, but it's definitely been worth my time. I'd still say I prefer Awakening and even Blazing Sword, but I think this game will keep me occupied for even more hours to come. And who knows, maybe I'll end up loving it even more.
Ha! Who needs some generic online shooters that look like a Pixar film? Not me!
So yeah, Overwatch is pretty sweet. Hey, if the game that brought me inside the FPS genre was a class-based online shooter with a ton of color and personality that were 450 hours well spent, you can bet your ass I want to experience it again. And Overwatch is so much more than just a clone of TF2. I mean, the premise of the game is pretty much the same with game modes like capturing the point and moving the payload, but that's really where the similarities end. Well, actually not really, but I digress. With 23 different characters to choose from, there's not only a huge variety in gameplay styles, but also a chance for everyone to have something they like. And no class really feels the same from each other, so playing as any one of them is always a different experience. Not to mention, the characters themselves are brimming with personality and are all interesting in their own ways, for the most part at least. Some of my favorites include D.Va, McCree, Mercy, Tracer, and Reinhardt. I'm not going to say Overwatch is absolutely perfect, but so far Blizzard is doing such a great job with it. I can definitely see why it was awarded the Game of the Year last year, and frankly, I can't wait to see what comes next of this game. Just Blizzard, since your characters are really interesting and I would love to know more about them aside from the webcomics, a story mode. Think about that. As most of you can probably guess, I'm not that much into RPGs made by Square. I did get into Kingdom Hearts pretty recently, and I'm still willing to play at least some games in the Final Fantasy series, but most of their standalone titles, for example, don't really interest me. But of course there always has to be an exception, right? And the exception's name in this case is The World Ends With You. This game really surprised me in quite a lot of ways. The premise of the game is that the main character Neku Sakuraba is trapped in the Reaper's game, which is designed to give dead people another chance in life. The only way to survive the game is to make a pact with one of the other players, who then becomes your partner and together with them, fight through the week. Which brings me nicely along to the gameplay. During battles, you control Neku on the touchscreen while also controlling your partner on the top screen, which means you have to pay attention on both screens at the same time. It can be pretty difficult at times, but it makes for a very unique and fairly enjoyable battle system. And that's without mentioning the other gameplay mechanics like the different pins, your partner's attack styles, and the trends, which affect your performance in battle depending on your equipment. However, the story is easily my favorite part of this game. The premise I explained about, that's just the tip of the iceberg for what this game's narrative is all about. It also helps to have a colorful cast of characters, and since there's not a single character in this game I straight up dislike, they did a great job. And as a bonus, the game's art style looks really great on the DS, and the music is absolutely godly. So to sum up, The World Ends With You is pretty much the whole package. It's entertaining from beginning to end, and overall, one of the best RPGs I've ever played. Action-packed games are my jam. Though despite this, I got into the hack and slash genre only a few years ago. And to this day, I still haven't played some of the genre's most famous series, like God of War. However, a few years ago, I tried the Devil May Cry series in the form of the 4th game and ended up loving it. And since I love DMC4 so much, it was only natural I would try what is considered to be the magnum opus of the series next. The reason I didn't get into Devil May Cry earlier was its stigma of ridiculous difficulty, and that went double for the 3rd game, Dantes Awakening. However, after actually playing the game, yeah, it's really hard, but it was never a game breaker for me. If anything, that difficulty felt pretty fair most of the time, and the fuck-ups you can make are mostly your own fault. And this all is thanks to the game's amazing combat system. It's incredibly fun to use Dante's multitude of weapons and combos to slice down dozens of demons in front of you. It's fast, tight, and responsive, and that's what makes it so good! The story's pretty well written too. I mean, any game with a likable cock like Dante as the protagonist is automatically enjoyable, but the game's pretty great during its more serious moments too, and it does a great job of fleshing out the few characters the narrative has, even aside from Dante. As for any criticisms about this game, well, the game's environments are a little too dark and dull for my taste, and some of the missions and bosses can fuck right off, but overall, it's mindless fun for all ages. Scratch that for all ages part. Metal Gear has been on my radar for the last few years now. I managed to play through the original, Sons of Liberty, and Rising Revengeance and enjoyed all of them, but not enough to really consider them to be some of my favorite games. But last year, I played through Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, and holy crap, this game surpassed my expectations with flying colors. Snake Eater is essentially a prequel to MGS1, where you play as Big Boss, or as he's known in this game, Naked Snake. The game takes place during the Cold War, and Snake is sent to infiltrate a Soviet warhead facility led by one Colonel Volgin. And that's only scratching the surface of the game's story. All the MGS games have a pretty good story, but I feel it's at its most interesting here. This is also helped by the game's improved writing. In the previous games, the characters sometimes felt pretty flat with nothing relatable to them. Of course, this wasn't always the case, but in MGS3, the characters you're talking to really feel like actual humans. There's more to codec calls than simply just giving your mission objective, and I think it helps making the characters feel more human. I also love the new gameplay mechanics. With the camouflage paint, you can essentially make your own hiding places, and the stamina meter for eating as well as curing wounds add realism to the game, but in a way that enhances the gameplay rather than hinders it. For all these reasons, I can definitely see why so many people call Snake Eater one of the best games they've ever played. And frankly, I enjoyed every minute of it as well.
Pocket Tamansui! Or something like that. I don't fucking know Japanese.
Yeah, I know, right? I have both Overwatch and Pokemon Sun and Moon on this list. Aren't I predictable? I know, it's almost like I like good games or something. All joking aside, the 7th generation of Pokemon was a very welcome surprise, especially after X and Y, which wasn't bad, just left a lot to be desired. And Sun and Moon filled those desires quite nicely. Not only does this game pull the 3DS to its limits with its jaw-dropping visuals and detailed artwork, Sun and Moon is also a huge step forward for the series. The formula is completely changed from the previous installments, with the island trials replacing the gym leaders. And with the things from each generation added in with the things this game added, it makes for quite a solid package. And I can't not mention some of these new Pokemon. While I'm still a little disappointed with the relatively small number, the phrase quality over quantity is in full effect here. In fact, they're so good I could probably make a list on my favorite Pokemon in the region. Some of my favorites include the Rowlet line, Turtonator, Palossand, and Salazzle. And as a few final cherries on top, the soundtrack is one of the series' finest, the story is fairly interesting, the new characters are all great, and Team Skull is easily one of my favorite villain teams in the series. So if you couldn't guess already, Sun and Moon is pretty awesome. While I'm not sure where to exactly rank it in terms of my favorite Pokemon games, I can definitely see why this game got such a huge critical acclaim. Here's to the great looking future of Pokemon ahead.
Something lawyer games.
Oh, what's this? An Ace Attorney game coming out in 2016? Count me fucking in! I mean, come on. Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice was probably my most anticipated game for 2016, and it most certainly delivered. On the outset, the game is very similar to its predecessor Dual Destinies. The new investigation mechanics are back, Mood Matrix is still a thing, and the overall art style from Dual Destinies is still pretty much the same. But again, it's the little things that make this game stand out from the rest of the series. First of all, there's a new gameplay mechanic, Divination Songs, which allows you to see the victim's final moments. It's very interesting how you need to point out contradictions in the victim's senses, and it makes for a very unique mechanic not seen in the series before. However, what truly makes this game is, being a visual novel and all, its narrative. And frankly, Spirit of Justice has one of the best stories in the series. In a nutshell, Phoenix arrives to this country named Kurine to meet up with his old friend Maya, yes she's back and I love it, where he gets caught up in the country's fucked up legal system, where defense attorneys are not to be trusted. And even though I talk about Phoenix, believe me when I say that this game's alternative title could be Apollo Justice 2. Seriously, if you somehow didn't like Apollo after Dual Destinies, this game will make you like him even more than the Alolan Executor. Add in yet another masterful soundtrack, and you've got the ingredients for one of the finest Ace Attorney games out there. So yeah, it's good shit. You know, I'm not very mainstream when it comes to my taste in RPGs. I mean, I don't really think much of Final Fantasy, and I play some weird, obscure Tales series. Who the hell even plays those? That's not to say I never play any popular RPGs, but I've certainly missed out on a lot of them, such as the games in Operation Rainfall. And if that name rings any bells, you probably know where I'm going with this. That's right, it's the last story, Xenoblade Chronicles. After hearing tons of praise going for this game and watching a good chunk of Sugar Conroy's LP, I had to see what all the fuss was about. And I came back with one of my new favorite RPGs. Xenoblade is massive in every sense of the word. Massive landscapes, massive monsters, massive amount of side quests, Ryan's massive six-pack. Wait, where was I going with this? So yeah, the game's pretty packed with content. And on top of that, the battle system is pretty fun too. Is fairly automatic, but the feeling of landing arts on your enemies, especially when you get it just right, feels awfully satisfying. And the variety in the playable characters really helps you choose the style you like the most. Be a heavy hitter like Ryan, a fragile speedster like Dumban, or if you really want to feel the Monado's power, Shulk is the option for you. And last but definitely not least, the game's presentation and story are absolutely fantastic. The game's environments are very varied and they all look beautiful as a bride's dress. The music is one of the best OSTs I've heard. The characters are all relatable and well written, and the story. Oh my god, the story. Every second of this narrative is brilliant, be it because of the superb and British voice acting or the genuinely interesting and gripping moments. I haven't beaten the game yet because again, it's fucking massive. But with 100 hours into the game as of now, this is definitely one of the finest games I've ever played. And also, that sequel though.
So who else wants to see teenagers murder the fuck out of each other? Not me!
Talk about rising from obscurity. The Danganronpa series has gotten quite a cult following during the last few years. I first got into the series by watching playthroughs of the first two games, and I liked them. Then the Steam ports came out, and now I have an excuse to put Goodbye Despair on this list. While I wasn't hugely impressed with Trigger Happy Havoc, the second game improved almost everything the first game did. So the basic premise is that 16 high school students have been trapped on a deserted island and are forced to kill each other if they want out. However, they also need to get away with it, which is why when someone is killed, a class trial is held. The game is filled with interesting and satisfying mechanics like Rebuttal Showdown, where you literally cut down arguments, and the Logic Dive, where you surf through your train of thought to find the truth. These really help make the game stand out from other visual novels with its interactivity, and shooting through contradictions is so goddamn satisfying. Not to mention, the whole game is accompanied by some dang tunes, whether it's to create atmosphere, help you focus, or just sound plain awesome. However, simultaneously the best and the worst part of this game are the characters. The best part because they're nearly all likable to some degree, and the worst part because when someone dies, you're going to die inside. And this is especially in effect for the second game's cast. There's also an overarching narrative from the first game, and the conclusion is just as mind-boggling, but I think it's best I keep my mouth shut. These games are filled with spoilers, so go play them for yourself, and we good. Now then, time for the old honorable mentions before number 1. Freedom Planet, Grim Fandango Remastered, Shantae Risky's Revenge, Brutal Legend, Mass Effect, Super Meat Boy, Saints Row 4, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Spyro the Dragon, Game Dew Tycoon, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, and Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. So yeah. I literally have nothing to say. Number 1 is Persona 4 Golden. Even after knowing a ton about this game for 3 years prior to actually playing it, the game was still an amazing experience. The game's story, much like Persona 3, is about a transfer student who, upon his arrival into the new town, gains the power of the wild card. However, the main premise this time is about catching a serial killer who throws people into a world inside the TV where the shadows dwell and kill the victim. And after the main characters get their hands on personas, they decide to catch the culprit with their newly found powers. The story of the game is pretty great, with themes such as facing your own self even with your faults and closing one's eyes to the truth. But the story wouldn't be nearly as good without its cast of colorful characters. All of the main characters are likable in some way, they all have a tremendous amount of character development, and they're all just so damn relatable. However, what ultimately makes me like this game more than Persona 3 is the gameplay. On the outset, it's pretty similar to Persona 3, but it's made much more enjoyable with additional options in battle, such as the option to control all party members. Yes, I need this! And the life sim portion of the game has also been polished with better social links, side quests, and more ways to earn money and raise your personality stats. I could go on and on about this game. I could talk about how this game plays out some of its most memorable moments, the additions and changes made in the golden version, or the little tweaks in gameplay that just make the game more enjoyable and satisfying to play, but I think I wouldn't do it justice. All you need to know is that Persona 4 Golden is easily one of the best games I've ever played.
I'm FinnishDuck, and Yosuke Hanamura is literally me. I can't even joke about this, he just is.
In the future we'll decide if there's a hero buried deep inside. I wanna be a hero. Pokemon!
It's not a game, I'm not a robot, and I'm challenging you. I'm not a man, I'm in your face, and I'm here to see you through. Right before your eyes, what just multiply? Got the same right,
for watching. Sorry that I didn't get this out during the first month of the year. I've been really busy with school again. Senior year is a bitch, to put it simply. That, and I also got sick during the editing process. But hey, you can follow me on Twitter if you want to keep up with me. I post updates there. Sometimes.